Okay, it's time. So I am starting this live chat, and I see people are joining already. Thank you so much for being here. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Today is a really awesome live chat that I have. Well, I hope it's awesome. I have planned. I've been doing so much research on it because today is actually the 138th anniversary of the signing of, oh, I see my brother. Hi, Glenn. Of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which, you know, banned Chinese people from coming into the United States. And so, you know, this is also Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so I wanted to do a chat that was going to be educational, that would also, you know, just include a little bit of history, a little bit of learning, but also include, you know, things that have been going on during this pandemic in the Asian community. I know that there's been a lot of, you know, attacks and things that have been going on, and there's an amazing site that I got turned on to by Daniel Dae Kim called Next Shark. And Next Shark, which you can find on Instagram, NEXT, Next Shark, they do a lot of great information about what's going on in the Asian community, you know, documenting a lot of these attacks, but also, you know, documenting great things that people are doing within the Asian community, and allies, and, you know, of the Asian causes and things like that. So I went to Next Shark because I follow them, and they started following me as well, because I've been, like, you know, commenting and whatnot. And I asked if I could get somebody on today to interview and talk about the goings on, and talk about the Asian Exclusion Act as well, which I actually had to do some research on, because I was not all that well versed in it either. So yeah, I was up all night watching videos and everything, and it was amazing. But anyway, so let me just bring on the gentleman who is the founder of Next Shark, Benny Luo. And let me see if I can find him in here. Okay, Benny, how do I do this? Do I go on here? No, those are for questions. Hold on. I'm still very new at this, so you guys have to really try to bear with me. Do I just go here? Wait, I see. Oh, here's the requests. No. Oh, there we go. Next Shark. Okay. I am going to add. Are you guys there? We're waiting. I guess I have to adjust this a little bit so that I don't get cut off.
Hello.
There you are. Yay! How are you?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm so glad that you are here. I'm so excited about this.
I'm glad to be here.
When I asked you to come on, you answered right away. You were so, like, responsive. And I didn't even, we were trying to, like, figure out a date. And then I was like, wait a minute. It's the anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Why don't we do it that day? You know, and so I made sure I did all kinds of research and stuff, and got so much of a better understanding of what this was all about. Did you know anything about this? I mean, I'm sure you knew something about it, but
yeah.
Were you well versed on this?
Well, first of all, before I get into that, I'm very, very happy to be here, and I'm happy to actually meet you face to face, because I've been such a big fan of you for so long. I mean, you know, I've seen you in all the movies and everything. And even my entire staff, when they saw that I was gonna, be speaking with you, they're like, "Oh my God, that's crazy!" And they were like referencing all these references from all the way back to martial law to Scorpion King to like all these other places. It was pretty awesome.
Law. That was awesome, right? Now, was that the first time that there was ever a Chinese or Asian leading man in a TV series?
Oh man, that's a good question. That was good. I know Russell Wong also like had a show for a little bit as well, like in the early 90s as well. So I'm not sure if he was the first or if Sammo was the first, but yeah.
Right. So Russell might have been the first American Asian.
That's right.
American, right? Because Sammo is actually from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So yay, Russell. Anyway.
Yay, Russell. But I'm in the same boat as you, I would think. I mean, I think that, even for me, like your family has an even richer history, as Chinese Americans here in the United States. Like for me, I actually, I was born and raised in San Francisco in the 1980s to Chinese immigrants. My mom was, trying to kind of flee from the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution. And so she was actually one of the people who you would call freedom swimmers. And so she actually swam from mainland China to Hong Kong to seek refuge. Literally swam. Mm-hmm.
How far is that?
I mean, I heard that it's like 10 hours and the funny thing is she got caught, by soldiers or something the first time, had to go to jail, got caught a second time, had to go to jail again for for months or something. And then, I believe she made it on the third try and then became a refugee in Hong Kong. And
How old was she when she did this?
I believe she was in her 20s because she had me when she was 33. She came in 1985, so she was in her 20s at the time.
Wow.
What happened?
Did she have to train for this? I mean, you don't just go and swim 10 hours, right?
That's on me. I mean, I haven't asked her enough of these questions, and I think that it's definitely my dream to actually sit down with her and actually, detail all this because it's a part of, our history.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
I encourage everyone to do, because everybody's got an iPhone now. Everybody's got video, right? I encourage everybody to put their parents and grandparents or whoever's still alive in front of a camera and just ask questions. Ask about their background, especially if they're immigrants, right? I love immigration stories because I always wonder what makes a person leave the comfort of their situation, even if, obviously it's not comfortable, right? Obviously they're leaving for a reason. Whenever I hear a person with an accent, like an Uber driver or whoever, I always ask where they're from because I'm always curious to know what brought them to the United States, what makes them want to leave their situation that's so bad that they're willing to come here, right? That they're willing to come here and oftentimes be treated really poorly, like the Chinese, who were coming, during the gold rush and whatnot, the influx of Chinese. I mean, the situation in China was terrible. Right. And so they were willing to live here in the United States as not even second-class citizens because they weren't even allowed to be citizens. Right. They were really sort of trapped in the United States because they couldn't go back. I mean, they could, but it was terrible back there. Right.
Yeah.
In China.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because I same as you. I mean, I was doing a lot of research as much as I can last night too.
And so in a sense, sometimes too.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I feel bad because in my mind I'm like, crap, how did I not know most of this stuff? But the reality is we were not really taught this in school. When, growing in America, it's almost like our history is either ignored or erased. And so I was so fascinated as I was reading, and I'm sure you were too.
So did you watch any documentaries? Because I watched this PBS thing about
Yes,
that was amazing. You guys, for people who are watching, I actually put the link up in my bio to this PBS documentary about the Chinese Exclusion Act. So what most people don't realize, because it's sort of glossed over in classes here in the United States, that the Chinese are really the only ethnicity ever to be like banned from entering the United States, right? Like actually like an ethnic group. Muslims, of course, in recent history, were banned for a little while, but that's a religion and not an ethnicity, right? It's kind of a little bit of a different thing. So this started happening when the Chinese were coming in for the gold rush, right? Yes. Around 1849, 50, around there. And back then there were no like customs agents waiting at the border. Like it wasn't really closed. It was kind of like you just got on a ship and you arrived in wherever, right?
And China was actually in a bad place at the time too, because this was after like kind of like during the Opium Wars and everything, when they kind of fought with Great Britain. And so they were actually, you know, so it wasn't a good, you know, place to be at the time, like lack of resources and everything. And so
and there was a civil war going on.
Yes,
with some guy who's claimed to be like the brother of Jesus. Like what the heck? Like, in China? I was shocked when I read that last night. I was like, how could that even be? I was like, did Jesus end up going to China? But
I know, right?
But so there was like this whole civil war and that people were trying to escape. They were getting on boats. They were coming to the United States in hopes of finding gold, like everybody else. But they looked very different. They looked very different from everybody else who was already there. Right. And there was all kinds of limits that were put on them, right? They couldn't be the first stakeholders for, you know, mining. They were banned from a lot of mining towns and areas. And it was only men that were coming over, right?
Yes. No women at the time.
Yes.
The Page Act, I believe, that barred, I think, Chinese women.
Yes, but that didn't come till much later. Yeah. They claimed that it was to protect women, right, from coming over as prostitutes and slaves and indentured servants and things like that. But really it was so that the Chinese women wouldn't come over and they would make families who could flourish here in the United States. They wanted the Chinese to die out, right? And just like not to either go back home or die out and not exist in the United States anymore. So
and they were taxed too. Like I think that they put like they gave them like a $3 tax for all like foreign miners, but obviously by foreign, you know, it's obviously
I heard
the Chinese
$4 and $5. So
$4?
I guess
that's
maybe there were like some different
fluctuations
depending on where you were. Which at the time it was like $4 or $5 a month, right?
Yes. Yes.
Or anywhere from 3 to 5 now. But at that time, I wonder what the equivalent was. We should ask. I don't even want to say her name right now.
That's an inflation expert.
but that is a good question, right? What would be the equivalent? I mean, that's got to be thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah, actually, you know what's interesting is according to the source that I found was the History Channel, and they basically said that you know, roughly about like $5 million at that time's money was collected from taxes, from this tax. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
For the state of California, right?
Yes.
Because
correct.
Here's the thing. The federal government didn't really care about the Chinese problem, right? It was more Californians and people on the coast who were just tired of the Chinese, you know, supposedly stealing their jobs. And so
sound familiar, right?
Right? I know. Isn't it crazy like how much parallel there really still is, right? And then the governor, this guy Bigler, who got elected, really started trying to like pass legislation to ban Chinese and to really limit their ability to have better circumstances, better lives. And he was really a jerk, you gotta say. I mean, he actually won the governorship on a anti-Chinese platform. And at the time, I was reading somewhere, I mean, there were maybe 30,000 Chinese in all of the United States.
Yes.
So, I mean, it wasn't like there was a huge population, but because they were
It
so
was
different.
point, I think at the time, I'm not sure if this figure is correct, but it was 0.002% of the population that
I
checked.
heard that too. I heard that
Yes.
too. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think it was mostly because they looked so different, and they were not able to assimilate, which of course was ridiculous because when you put them in a situation where they cannot assimilate, how are you going to expect them to suddenly become American, right?
Yeah.
When
Setting them up to lose, basically.
Exactly, exactly. They banned them from all these places. They had to live in their own little communities. They started developing their own Chinatowns, right? They started building Chinatowns eventually. They're, and so of course, they weren't allowed to rent outside of Chinatown. Nobody would rent to them. They couldn't eat at other places. So here you are claiming that these people are not able to assimilate, yet you will not allow them outside of their own little areas.
And you couldn't defend yourself either from certain justices. I mean, I don't know if you read about the People versus Hall Supreme Court case. Did you read
No,
about
I don't
that?
remember that one.
So
There's so
I
many.
didn't. Yeah, there's so many. It's really fascinating actually because like, and I don't know too much about the details of this case, but apparently a white man murdered a Chinese miner, and three Chinese miners witness. There were witnesses that made this happen, and so and so obviously this got up to the Supreme Court, and basically the white guy got freed, and the reason being was they said that the law states that Chinese people are not eligible to testify against white people in the court of
Yes,
law, right?
exactly. There was a whole massacre that happened in Oregon, I think it was, where like they this a couple of like a band of rednecks basically went from mining town to mining town, finding these Chinese and basically slaughtered them, hung them, tortured them, and dumped their bodies in a river. And I think it was like 18 or something Chinese men that were killed. That these and three men, I think that admitted to these killings out of all the men who did it, and they got set free.
Yeah.
No charges were brought. So Chinese people were really not even considered human practically. I mean, you could not get arrested for murder or charged with murder if you murdered a Chinese person. So there were also. Did you read about
It's like
all
we didn't
these
even
like
count as a
lynchings?
person.
Sorry?
It's like we didn't even count as a person.
No, no. And also, Chinese were never allowed to become citizens until
Yes.
much, much later. And so, as a citizen, you have no rights. You have no, you could never, of course, there was no chance of immigration. They really made sure that you were not able to become a citizen. And so you had no rights, you had no law on your side. The only way that they could find justice in anything was through the court system. So a lot of Chinese would try to take their cases all the way, through court systems in order to find justice. And gosh, it's such a long history. It starts in the 1800s, but the actual Exclusion Act is finally signed in 1882, right?
Yes.
1882. I actually have my notes here on my iPad.
And the funny thing was back then, 1882, that was set to, bar, Chinese immigrants for 10 years. But then the Gary Act happened in 1982, which extended that, exclusion for an additional 10 years. And so it's been a really, really long process. And what's interesting is, I think you saw this too on the PBS documentary, is that what I found fascinating was the case of Wong Kim Ark.
Yes.
I'm sure you've read about him.
Yes.
That was really interesting. I mean, a guy that was born maybe I think it was like a few years before the Chinese Exclusion Act, but even then it was during a time when there was a lot of anti-Chinese sentiments, and
which was the whole time.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so, this is a man that was born, born and raised in America, and he went back overseas. He went overseas to China, came back, had no issues. But then another time that he came back, they didn't let him in, and he was detained.
And he was
And
born in the United States.
he was born in the United States,
That's,
and he didn't qualify. They said that he didn't qualify as an American citizen, because of Chinese exclusion or whatever that is, and. His case was eventually brought up to the Supreme Court. And I believe it was 1898? I think that was the date. That was the year when, they ruled that, as long as you are born in America, you're an American. You're a naturalized citizen. And so
was
this
that the 14th Amendment thing where they were saying, where that was used a lot, the 14th Amendment, because of a single word, the word person, rather than citizen, like how everyone had to be sort of treated equal. And that whole, and so him doing this whole naturalized citizen thing, and he actually won, right?
Yes, he did.
It set a precedence.
And that paved the way for everybody. Like, even whether you are Chinese, whatever, if you were born on American soil, you're a naturalized, citizen.
Right. So yeah. I posted, it's so funny because, yes, last night, I was looking through my photos and stuff, and I remembered that I had what seemed like an immigration photo of my grandfather and his brothers and sisters and his mom.
That was wild. Seriously, that was wild.
Isn't that so crazy?
You gotta tell me about this. This is crazy.
So
yeah.
I found this photo that my aunt gave to me. She has since passed, but she gave me a bunch of old family photos, and I found this photo. I remembered that there was sort of an immigration photo, and I looked at the photo and I was like, okay, this might have been around the same time as all of this stuff was going on that I was reading about, right? So I looked up, my grandfather was actually born in 1900, and then I was matching it with all these dates, and I was like, well, how did he come to the United States? How did we become citizens? And I realized he was born on Kauai, which, was 2 years, he was born 2 years after Hawaii was made a territory, right? Was annexed. And so it was, before that, it was a monarchy. And so he was born 2 years after that. But my grandparents, his parents, my great-grandparents must have come even before that to Hawaii and had several children. He wasn't the oldest, but they came to Hawaii, which did not have these kind of prejudices and immigration laws, and did not have this Page Act, and so they were able to immigrate to Hawaii and have children and have a family and flourish, unlike if they had gone all the way to the United States, at the time was the United States.
Do you have any info on what they did at the time? I'm always fascinated by these firsthand accounts.
So I was told that he was a merchant, but reading all these things about the immigration, it makes me wonder if they really were or if they just said it, because only merchants could come with their wives to the United States, right? And so I think a lot of people claimed to be merchants, or somehow got up enough money to become merchants or whatever, so that they could bring their wives and be there legally. If you were not a merchant or a diplomat or a student, you were not allowed to enter the U.S. and live there. And I think they even merchants and stuff could not become citizens. I mean, I think there was still a lot of prejudice that way.
Right. Yeah.
What about your family? So your mom, so you're second generation now. How in Hawaii we count it the first people that come over is the first generation, and the people who were born in the United States are the second.
See,
So
that's what I'm confused about always because like I always wonder, hey, am I considered first or second generation? Because like some people like say no, like
right.
if your parents were here first, like they landed here first, so they're the first generation. But others like I've seen it defined as oh, if you're the first person to be born here after your parents, then it begins that. I
Right.
mean, I have no qualms with either or, but it's always interesting to see the both. Yeah.
Right. So my grandparents were born in Hawaii. In fact, my mom's dad, my grandfather on my mom's side, was born in Kula on Maui. So this was also he was born in 1905. So that was also fortuitous for me for my family. And then on my grandmother's side, I'm actually part Hawaiian, so it goes through like all the Hawaiian, all the women in my family. So my mom, my grandmother, her mom, her mom, her mom, her mom, her mom were pure Hawaiian. So we were here before the white man came, before the colonists,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
like nobody could really,
You were the OGs,
we
you've
were
already
the
established them.
OGs, exactly. The women in my family.
That's amazing. And did you know like anything after? Because like 1900s is pretty far back. I mean, like, is there any like sort of like history of like where your ancestors came from in Asia, like beyond
Yeah,
1900s?
I think all of the Chinese in Hawaii pretty much came from those same villages that were on the coast, right?
Mm-hmm.
That were near, like, north of Hong Kong.
Oh,
Is
okay.
it Guangzhou?
Yep, yep.
Yes, Guangzhou. So I
Yep.
think a
Yep.
lot of them came from that area. Um, I remember my mom saying something about, I think her family was Hakka and my father's family was Punti, which that doesn't mean anything to me at all.
I'm also half Hakka too,
Oh,
actually.
are you?
Yeah,
Okay.
I am. I am.
So,
I am. Yeah.
so I guess, and that's a whole language unto itself, right?
Right. Exactly. It's
Even
a
though
whole different dialect.
my father spoke Cantonese. Do you speak Cantonese?
I do. I do speak Cantonese.
Oh,
I
wow.
do.
Good for you. I
The funny
never
thing
learned.
was, it's funny, like, because like I was actually so I grew up in I was born and raised in San Francisco, but because my parents they were working all the time. I mean, like my parents would wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, work at the Chinese restaurants, and then at night they would go to learn English right after work. And then
Oh,
they would do that for a
wow.
couple hours, study a little bit, and by the time they came back home, it would be around like 11 o'clock. So then they take 1 hour to rest up and wash up, sleep at 12 o'clock, wake up at 5 a.m. again, and do it all over again. And
Wow.
so, there wasn't really, I didn't really get to see them as much, I would say, like growing
Did
up
you
in
have
my
brothers and
years.
sisters?
I do have one younger brother. Yeah, 2 years
Okay,
younger
so
than
it's
me.
just the two of you.
Yeah,
So
just the
how do
two
you
of
guys
us.
like take
So
care of
my
yourselves?
so my grandma, so I had a grandma that that took care of us like most of our years up until like I think all the way up until like later on into our elementary school years.
And
And
that's a very typical story, right? Of
it
of,
is.
of Chinese immigrants, right? I
It
mean,
is.
my mother, I mean, she's not an immigrant, because her lineage goes far back, to the Hawaiian, but she never had less than three jobs. She was always working her full-time job, and then she had like her real estate thing going on weekends, and then she would do anything else, like all these other little jobs, selling things, or always like trying to figure out like ways to make and save and invest,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And
We were very
that's also a
conservative.
big thing in the Chinese community. You don't spend and live like lavishly. You save and you invest whatever money you are able to scrounge up, right?
Yeah, it's a very focus on like family and obviously of saving for the next generation. I mean, I know that I think that in very very traditional, and I mean like very far out in the olden days of China. I mean, children were like prized, were seen as prized possessions, and so that there's that sort of
Boys
relation.
were.
Oh, yeah, that's true. You're right. Yes, that's true.
Boys
That's true.
were, not
Got to
so
make
much
that
the
distinction.
girls.
You are right about that. Yes, that's a very good distinction to make for sure. Yes.
Yeah. But no, I remember my mom going decades even without buying clothes. I mean, she was just like, she would just save every little bit, just to make sure that she had investments and things like that. So going back to this history, right? It was sort of the same thing, right? A lot of these Chinese would be working, and they would save up all their money, and they would live in bunk beds on top of each other in these tiny, like Chinatowns, and they would send money home. you know, to wives that they might have had, like with arranged marriages or family. And they would write letters home, and a lot of them didn't even know how to read or write, right? So they would go
Yes.
to shops, laundromats, or specialty places where someone would actually be literate, and they would write letters home for them, or they would receive letters and this person would read it for them.
That
And
I didn't know about. That's an interesting detail. You really got deep
yeah,
into this. Damn.
yeah. No, I watched a couple of documentaries. I was up till like morning out, like the sun coming up. I could not stop watching. It was so amazing.
Was it fascinating for you? Kind of like,
It,
wow, this is our history. This is
it
you know.
really was. And there was a point where I just felt so, in a way, not just guilty, but there was a sense of pride, but also I felt so bad for these poor men who were coming over and enduring these terrible conditions, and lynchings even. When I heard about the lynching in Los Angeles, did you read about that?
Yeah, that was supposedly, and of course, like, you know, it varies between who records it, but I read that it's either the most or the biggest, like, you know, like mass lynching at the same time, like, you know, people being lined up and lynched at the same time in recorded history. So,
Right.
and so that was a massacre not many people know about, you know?
Yeah, and happening right here in Los Angeles, when
LA
you're in San
Chinatown.
Francisco. But
Yeah.
right here
Yeah.
in Los Angeles, in the Chinatown, which, you know, they hung all these people, lynched, and that happened through a lot of Chinatowns, a lot of San Francisco Chinatown. I mean, all these different places, people would just go and literally gather the people from the Chinatowns, either lynch them, kill them, whatever, or put them on ships, right? Put them on boats that were like paid for or however, and just herd them on there and send them off. And a lot of times they would arrive in San Francisco.
Right.
That's why San Francisco has such a big Chinatown, right?
Yep. And the early, most of them early on, I think it came from, like, as you said, like, you know, in the Guangdong province area. I know the early ones, the dialect. I think the two biggest dialects was like Toisanese, which is the first one, and then the second one was like Cantonese. And then subsequently, we saw like more immigrants from different parts of China come as the decades went by.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I always thought that it was Cantonese that was the biggest, but maybe that's only because I grew up in Hawaii and
Early on, I mean, like, you know, Cantonese is definitely big. I mean, like, but if you really, really want to go back far enough to like the first ones, I heard
right.
that it was, you know, I've read that it was Toisanese, but you know, but
no, you're probably right.
Yeah, but obviously, you know, it seemed like they were mostly Cantonese, like as the years go by. As you know, as you said, I mean, a lot of these people that I've seen personally, like when I go to, like, let's say New York Chinatown, or when I see LA Chinatown or San Francisco Chinatown, like usually it's Cantonese that I hear being spoken amongst, like, you know, the elderly when I walk by.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
See, I might not actually know the difference.
No, it's okay. Hey, and you know what? Like, neither you or I are historians. I mean, I guess you could say, you know, I have a platform. Like, you know, I am a journalist on some occasions and everything. But, you know, the truth is, I mean, a lot of this history has either been hidden from us, or, you know, we haven't been exposed to it. So I feel like, you know, you and I are really just, you know, learning about this as we go. And I think you and I share the same, like, you know, sort of like interest, but also almost like shock, because, like, wow, like, we are rich in history. There is a lot of history, you know, that dates back to centuries.
Did your parents ever talk about this Chinese Exclusion Act? I mean, your mom is sort of a recent immigrant, right?
Yeah, she's too recent. I mean, like, you know, she came in 1985, you know, okay. So very, you know, and so, you know, born in China, you know, born in mainland China and everything. And, you know, my father as well. So, you know, obviously, of course, like, if we are, like, you know, first, second generation, third generation here, we might not, you know, really know so much about it, just because simply our parents just don't know.
It was never mentioned to me. But maybe also because I was growing up in Hawaii. So it was like a whole different mindset. You know, it wasn't as, but however, Hawaii did get annexed. It did become a state much, much later. And so these laws, starting from, I think, 1902, this Chinese Exclusion Act actually was in, you know, in Hawaii, practiced in Hawaii as well as early as 1902.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great.
I just saw a
Hawaii
very,
was,
very fast clip in one of the documentaries that I watched. And But
There's
yet,
so many Asians there, though. How are you gonna,
I,
somebody's gonna get pissed off.
right? Exactly. I'm not exactly sure how that worked, if it was really enforced. Maybe they were just like, okay, you got this law, but who's going to enforce it? Um, but anyway, so yeah, so Chinese were getting really creative on how they would come over to the United States. I saw in one of the documentaries that they would dress up as Mexicans and walk
What?
from across the border. Yeah, or get on Cuban ships and jump ship. I mean, it was just like it was so they would learn like a couple of phrases in Spanish so that if they were stopped, they could just say a couple of things, but pretending to be Mexicans and walking across the border. It was such an amazing what they would do to come to the United States and then be treated like crap. I mean, it was like, it must have been absolutely horrible because they knew what they were walking into. They knew. Yep. So Angel Island, which is in San Francisco, have you ever been?
I have not. Oh, wait, Angel Island. I've seen it at a distance, but I haven't actually been to it. Yeah.
I'm assuming they probably do tours and things like that, right?
Probably.
So last night was the first I actually learned of Angel Island. I
didn't
know. Yes. I had no idea of this detention place, really. It was where it was the how do you say, the Ellis Island of the West, right?
Right.
Where boats would come and drop off passengers and they would stay at Angel Island.
Was it the same as Alcatraz Island or no? Is it different?
Alcatraz That's different. Alcatraz Island, it was like where they had the prisons, right?
Prisoners,
but this,
right.
In a sense, was a prison because sometimes people were there for as long as over 700 days. That's over 2 years. People were trapped on this island.
Does it make sense to count days at this point?
The United States. They made it so difficult that people would be there for months trying to answer questions. They would have literally thousands of questions that had to be answered. And if you didn't get it right, you would be sent away. You would either be deported. People were actually trapped there for so long, they were begging to be deported back to China. The conditions were terrible. They were, just trapped in prison.
Yeah, I don't expect it to be treated that well. I don't expect it to be treated that well.
Yeah, it was so crazy. So people knew what they were walking into. They purposely made it that difficult because they didn't want Chinese immigrants. They wanted that, for people for Chinese to say, this is how hard it's going to be. And there were families that were separated, right? There was a story of a girl whose real parents were actually in the United States. And she came as one of those, had you heard about the Paper Sons, about how people would pretend. So for people who are following us, one of the best things that ever happened to the Chinese immigrants was the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, right? Because all of the records were burned. There was like this huge fire, and all of the records about who was a citizen and who was not a citizen, were burned. And so they could just kind of, claim that they were born in the United States. And that they had, so many kids that they had fathered back home that they were bringing over. And so they would, say that they had more children than they actually had. And they would be able to bring over more people than just
a lucky break. We needed that. We needed that break.
Yes, exactly.
We needed it.
I think I actually had an uncle that was brought over that way. My father would call one of his cousins or something a brother, and so legally on paper it was an extra brother, but in actuality it wasn't. He was some sort of distant relative, like some sort of distant cousin or something that was brought over as a brother, on paper. So yeah, it was kind of a crazy,
How does that make you feel? how does that make you feel? Like, because, obviously I see you as a pioneer, in our community too. I mean, with all the work that you've done in entertainment, I mean, and the work that you still continue to do. I mean, what is it like to kind of go back and look at all this rich history that you didn't even know about before?
I feel really embarrassed that I didn't know more, because I should, because I people do sort of look up to me for, like, sort of helping this movement, right, of getting Asian Americans sort of more out there. And I really do feel embarrassed. I was Miss Teen USA, for God's sakes. It's
Yeah,
like I
the first.
should
You're
know
the
more about
first.
this stuff.
Yes, people that don't know, Kelly, Kelly was the first Asian American Miss Teen USA.
Yeah, and the same year that your mother came to the United States in
That's true.
1985. Yeah.
Yes, that's
And
true.
and it also brought me to tears last night. It actually occurred to me that when I won this pageant, I wasn't doing it to, move mountains or anything. I was literally doing it just for my own selfish reasons, because I wanted to model in Japan, and they told me that I, could make more money. It was really all about money. I could make more money if I won this.
Hey, everybody's got to eat.
Local pageant, exactly. And, of course, I was, being raised by a single mom who was struggling with 3 jobs. And when I won the national pageant, not expecting to ever win, I just did it. I did the national pageant as an obligation. I just needed the Hawaii pageant so that I could, make more money in Japan over the summer. But then I had to run in the national pageant as an obligation, never expecting to win, remembering that my mother actually told me before I got on the plane, she says, "Now don't cry when you don't win, because America is not ready for Oriental Miss Teen USA." And I was like,
you had a tiger mom, didn't you?
Fashion. This is
That's a very
1985. Nobody ever thinks like that anymore.
Was your mom a tiger mom?
I was so modern, but clearly, I mean, because I grew up in Hawaii, and where we are the majority, right? Hawaii is full of Asians. So it didn't even occur to me that people in 1985 would still be prejudiced. I had no idea of this Chinese Exclusion Act. I had no idea of, the prejudices that still existed. It wasn't until I got up to the pageant and girls were like, "So you're from Hawaii. Do you guys live in grass huts? Do you wear coconut bras? How did you learn to speak English so well?" And I was like, "Oh, wow. People really do not know about us."
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. So when I won this national pageant and I came back to Hawaii, there were these Chinese banquets and all these people that were like celebrating, and it was so huge for the Chinese community. And as a teenager, I was just like, "Oh my God, I have to go to another one of these Chinese banquets where they're going to be singing Chinese opera." And it was like 12 hours long. And it was just like, I didn't understand the significance of having this honor bestowed upon me. I was too young to really know the struggles.
Well, you didn't know the context either. I mean, it's hard. The context is everything, right? And so, yeah.
So when I watched all this stuff last night and saw how all the way up until when was because this Chinese Exclusion Act dragged on for decades, right? It wasn't until like the 1950s, 1952, when Kennedy sort of abolished it, really.
Yeah, it was like there was something called it was in 1943. That's when like Chinese people could be naturalized as U.S. citizens, but that was only because of World War II, and I believe it's because China and U.S. were allies at the time, and
exactly.
So that's why it happened. So
and Chinese Americans were fighting as soldiers.
Yes.
And Japanese were then all of a sudden the bad guys.
Yeah.
All these decades, or of the Chinese being the bad guys. All of these cartoons. Do you see so many images, right? Of in
the Yellow
that were in the newspapers, of these
Yep.
coolies, the coolie invasion or whatever, and suddenly this war happens and Chinese are no longer the bad guys. the Japanese become the bad guys, and the Chinese are like, you know, suddenly like, oh, come fight with us, and because they wanted to, you know, China as an ally. And they're like, and China's like, you know, the Japanese were trying to get China as an ally in that war, saying, you know, here they have all these laws excluding you guys. Like, America doesn't love the Chinese. And so they had to start relaxing on some of these laws in order to get China as an ally to fight against the Japanese.
It was more of a political move. Yeah.
Right? Exactly. It was not because of they had a new sudden love for the Chinese. Yeah. That's for sure.
Exactly.
So a lot of these people who were, you know, throwing these banquets and celebrating for me and all of this, you know, remember all of this Chinese Exclusion Act, because it wasn't until really in recent history that, you know, some of that stuff had been relaxed. So yeah, I really feel badly that I didn't really understand the significance, and I didn't appreciate this part of history, you know?
Well, don't blame yourself for it too. I mean, I think that as long as like, I think that I also felt that same sort of guilt too, in a sense, you know, but now looking back, I'm like, man, like, you know, it's just that I just wasn't taught this, and, you know,
right.
and I think the only thing I can do is to spread the word for current and future generations to come, as we are, you know, trying to do right now. And
exactly.
The crazy thing is, I think that we've only really scratched the surface. I mean, like, you know, this Chinese exclusion and everything makes up only a small fabric of, you know, the Asian American diaspora, right?
Right.
But the very interesting thing is everything is connected. I mean, all the things that, you know, we fought for, other minorities fought for, that dealt with. I mean, ultimately, it helped each other as a whole.
And you are actually posting about the things that are going on now in this day and age. Like, it's been 138 years since the Chinese Exclusion Act. 138 years today, right, that this Chinese Exclusion Act was signed and passed. And yet we're still experiencing, on a different level now, prejudices and attacks on Asian Americans.
Right.
And you guys are covering a lot of that. So first of all, tell me, now you guys, Next Shark has been around for how many years now?
Oh my God. It's been, I think, 7 years now, like close to 7 years now.
7 years. And
7 years.
I have to brag, we're in Forbes magazine, right? As like one of the 30 under 30, right? Who, of founders, you know, with Next Shark. So you guys are sort of like a place that people can find information, not just about the bad things that are going on, because there's a lot of attacks and stuff that you guys are documenting. But also some of the great things that Asian Americans are doing, and their allies, you know, are doing for the Asian community. So how did this get started? Why did you think there was a need for this?
Okay, so this is what I'll say. I'll preface this by saying that I've always had like a passion for Asian American issues and Asian American culture. I mean, you know, I grew up facing racism, bullying, and everything growing up because of the color of my skin. And so that stuff wasn't new to me, right? And I've always had this like, feeling of like Asian pride and being proud for who I am, right? And then, but I never thought that I could like, you know, build a business out of it. I've never thought to do that, you know? And so how Next Shark came to be is very, very organic. I mean, I had just sold my first company called NewMediaRockstars.com, and that was a publication focused on covering internet celebrities, like the rise of YouTubers and the rise of, you know, online streaming like Netflix and Hulu and these new and this like kind of new generation of entertainment, right? And after I sold that, I was trying to figure out what to do next. And so I started Next Shark, and Next Shark actually started off as a publication on business and success for millennials. Very, very different. And so basically, so what happened was I took $3,000 of my own money. So we've never raised a round of funding. So like, you know, that $3,000 was what I, you know, kind of put into it, and subsequently we've grown to what we have today. And, you know, so for those who don't know, like the reason why it's called Next Shark is because,
I was wondering.
So I used to be like a pretty like heavy online poker player. And so all of my closest friends it's funny because I never consider myself a professional player. I've never played like the WSOP or anything, but a lot of my best friends and closest
friends. I played the women's one.
I know, I heard, I know. I got excited when I was like, oh, she's a poker fan. We're going to get along just fine, you know? So, I was one of those kids that, in college, I'd be playing 24 tables at once. So at one point, 24 tables,
is that how you put yourself through college?
I didn't put my, I mean, I made enough to buy my first car. That's all that's all I'll really say, but it wasn't, but I didn't like make enough to like make a crazy living for myself, obviously, but it wasn't bad, what I made. So yeah, shark comes from, poker being a poker shark. Next signifies the next generation. And so we spent the first, I would say 2 years just covering business success for millennials, but then we noticed that a lot of our Asian-centric content was doing really well. And so basically, whenever we featured an Asian face, doing well in Asia, or, there are a lot of Asian Americans were making a big impact in the tech scene, starting companies, starting businesses and everything. And we just
we know so many of them, right?
Yeah. And so naturally, we just saw ourselves we saw wow, there's a big uptick in engagement whenever we showcase it. Maybe we should showcase more, Asian founders just for the heck of it. And we did. And then readership started growing. And then I would say about a couple months later was the 2016 Olympics, right? And we started getting all these DMs from people going, oh, why don't you cover Asian athletes? We don't really get any coverage and representation in that. You guys should cover it. And we're like, oh, we're focused on business, but I guess we'll try it out. Let's do it. And then we did, and traffic continued to increase. And over time, we just built a big following with Asian Americans. And then what happened was, eventually people started asking us to cover crimes against Asian Americans because, these are some of the most young, not as reported. And so I just kept, so it was a very organic experience. And so while, yes, my staff and myself, we do get credit for, we'll get credit for starting, this platform, but really it was the community leaders and, our readership that really helped drive us forward.
Right.
And so
you saw the need and you filled it.
Yeah, and so people like you, influencers like yourself, I mean, we're heavily dependent on supporters like you guys. I mean, without you guys, without our readership, without our supporters, there would be no Next Shark. And so I've always I'm always going to be eternally grateful for the community.
Well, we are so grateful for all the work that you guys do, because I get so much of my information about what's going on in the Asian community, especially right now during this pandemic, because there's been so much anti-Asian sentiment going around.
So many parallels, right? We're talking about Chinese Asian,
Yes. I'm thinking, I was thinking that when I was doing all this research, how things have really not changed all that much in 138 years. And so, so you guys are documenting all of these attacks and events that are going on, positive and negative, which I commend you for, because it could be all just really downer stuff, which is really, it's sometimes I go on your site and I see the things that are happening in the Asian community and my heart just sinks. And I see what just recently, these guys who kicked this girl in the face. Mm-hmm. She's just standing there at what looks like maybe a bus stop or something. They corner her. She is maybe not even, she's maybe 4'5". She's tiny.
Could be any one of our relatives, that could be my own grandma, you know what I mean?
And they just literally kick her in the face. She's not even answering back or anything. She doesn't even look like she's talking to them, but they are, but things like that of all of these things that are happening now because of this pandemic and this Asian virus or this China virus that, people are taking advantage of.
Yeah. Now we're suddenly the enemy again.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, do you see this changing anytime? I mean, what can we do to help this situation?
That's $1 million question, really. It's very, it's, I get a lot of DMs like this, and, I'm actually about to, after I get off, I'm actually about to, release a letter that I've kind of written for Asian American Pacific Heritage Month for Next Shark. Oh. And one of the things that I touch on is aside, we've been getting a lot of aside from just DMs of, people reporting on hate crimes and everything, we've also been getting a lot of DMs just of people asking us, what do we do? I'm really scared. I've never like experienced, something like this before. And or they're very, very angry. They have no idea like, what to do. And like, they feel like they have to take action. Right.
Yes.
And the truth of the matter is like, one thing that I've noticed that a lot of Asian Americans have right now when in terms of emotion is rage. And that rage, is a product of a lot of things that have been kind of built up over the years. And so, for example, I don't know how you were raised, but like, a lot of Asian Americans were kind of raised to, don't cause any trouble, stay silent, and just head down and just kind of, get to work, right?
And so why we don't vote, right?
that too. There's so many things.
Are the least likely of any ethnicity to vote. I did a whole PSA on it. Anyway, go on.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And and so I think that, and then so now it's kind of like, okay, well, what do we do? Like, there is definitely a lot of, uncertainty happening, but you hit it on the head. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. I mean, number one, like, supporting each other as much as you can. Like right now, like unity is more important than ever. If we don't stick together, you can't move the needle forward, right? And secondly,
and allies. We need allies.
Exactly. The second thing. Exactly. Right. Allies. I mean, to speak up, right? If they see injustice happening, that it's very powerful to know that somebody, has your back. Right.
Especially non-Asians, right? If a non-Asian person, comes up to a person who's attacking an Asian person, it somehow means more to that person than if another Asian person says, "Hey, dude, stop that!" Right?
Yep.
That's
exactly.
not cool. So we do need to gain more allies outside of the Asian community that will speak up for us as well as for ourselves. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And other things is, obviously you hit on the head. Like, we gotta vote. We gotta, we gotta fill out the census. I mean, I know that there's a lot of controversy surrounding like, the census or whatever that may be, or distrust, right, for the system. But I mean, looking back, I mean, it's really the only, like the census is really like the only thing that solidifies how many of of Americans in this country, right? And and if they don't see the numbers, then it's almost like we don't exist.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
And getting involved, right? Not just with the census, but with voting, right? Because if we don't have people who are looking out for our interests, we'll never get, things like the Chinese Exclusion Act can happen again.
Yeah.
It sounds unfathomable that something like that would happen, but look at the Muslim community and what happened there. I mean, stuff.
And our
like
ancestors fought hard. Our ancestors fought hard for this. Like they fought all the way up to the Supreme Court. Like I can't, dude. I mean, I don't know if I can imagine myself like fighting so hard, for a singular issue all the way up. Like that's difficult. That's hard.
And these were guys who didn't have like great universities and things, backing them, all this education. I mean, they were, a lot of them were self-educated and then ended up sending themselves to college, somehow getting into colleges but a lot of these guys who were going all the way up to the Supreme Court did not have, formal education. Anyway, wow. This hour has gone by so fast. We've only got 2 minutes left.
Has it been an hour already?
I know.
I know. I feel like we got to do this again someday.
I know. I feel like you said, we just barely scratched the surface on all of this. So in the last couple of minutes, is there anything else that you wanted to share or say that you think it's important for people who are listening? Because we've actually maintained a pretty solid number since the very beginning of this
thanks
podcast.
for sticking by. Oh my God, I'm surprised.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's important that, I know it sucks and I know that, everybody's scared and people in our community are being attacked. I mean, we're seeing physical violence and it sucks, right? But I think that, in order for us to find the best ways to take action, the first thing to do is to, try to maintain a cool head and think about, what are the actions that, I can take to make this situation better, but also to also spread kindness at this time. I mean, obviously there's certain people there's going to be certain people out there that deserve the hate and to be canceled, the whole cancel culture that's happening. But I also think that, we also have to, find opportunities to educate, those that are just blinded by ignorance. That's about it, right? Not blinded by hate, by ignorance. And I know that there's tons of people out there, and I think that we do have a responsibility to, do our best to educate others, like within our community, but also outside our community in the best way possible, using the right contexts, and it's all about understanding, right? To find that common ground, and as long as we find common ground, like I don't see how we can't move forward.
Right. Well, this is why we're doing this today, right? Educating people and opening them up to the history and what's going on now, making that connection. So thank you so much for doing this and joining me today. Oh my God.